Okay, we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Until Tom is on the line, we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. I will start by calling roll in the order I see them on the screen. Meredith Knight.
Here.
Jeff Marks. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeff, you're on here too. My bad. Drew Flayhive.
Here.
Phil Dixon. Jeff Green.
Present.
Ryan Clinton.
Yes, present.
Brooke Brown.
Present.
Wallace Grainer.
Present.
And Mo Goyle.
Here, thank you.
Great. If we have any other members join, we'll grab them along the way.
Great. Our first item, our second item on the agenda is the action on the minutes from the November 16 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes and move forward.
I'll second that. All those opposed? Any opposition? Okay, well, the minutes are adopted for the November 16 meeting. The next item is adoption of.
We did have a public comment section
Oh,
before. Also, I think we have plenty of chances for public comment today, but we do have one at the beginning as well.
all right. Let's go to that then. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment at this time?
At this time, there are no hands raised. I don't think we have anybody calling in, but if you're calling in, it is *9 to raise your hand. But no, at this time, we do not have anybody.
Okay, then we'll go to item 3, which is action on the November 30 minutes from the town hall. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion, Ms. Meredith.
Second.
And we have a second. Any opposition or comment? The minutes are approved for the November 30 Strike Force Town Hall. Then the next item on the agenda is a presentation from Mayor Pro Tem Gavin Massengill.
He's unable to make this meeting, but will be at the next meeting. So we'll have this on the agenda at next week's meeting.
All right. And so I guess we'll also postpone item number 5, discussion, public comment and action on the budget presentation, since that is Gavin's item.
Yes.
All right. Then item number 6 is a presentation from Chief Jason Brady. Chief Brady, are you with us? I see you there. But welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So I don't per se have a presentation prepared. I was informed that I would be basically responding to any questions that anyone might have in regards to some of the different proposals out there and what impact they may have for public safety or our police department in particular.
Okay. Are there, Chief Brady, is there anything, any comments that you have or concerns you have that you'd like to address at the outset?
So I had, my understanding was some of the issues that may or may not be on the table, and correct me or jump in if I'm mistaken, was possibly the construction of maybe multifamily housing, maybe an increased footprint for our retail area, maybe a walking trail along the creek, some things like that in terms of improvements or changes to Rollingwood. Is that my understanding.
Right. I think all ideas are on the table at this point.
Right. So in terms of how things like that may impact our ability to respond in terms of the police department, let's kind of go through some of those one at a time.
All right.
Depending on, do we have any idea as to the size and the sort of density of any sort of multifamily dwellings that's proposed?
Other members of the committee, please feel free to comment, but at this point, Chief Brady, I think we are looking at all options. There's not been a position specifically placed on the agenda as yet for those issues. They are concepts, and one of the things the strike force is trying to do is to understand what kinds of practical limitations and considerations and costs there may be associated with some of the ideas that are in discussion now.
Fair enough.
So we would love to have your input on that issue.
Absolutely. So as
I see Phil Dixon has raised his hand also, so he may have a question here at the outset.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I was going to suggest, Chief, is if we assume the static population, which I think is 1564 as per the sheets I've been looking at, what kind of personnel increase would you require for a 10, 20, and 30% increase of that population? And then similarly, if we were to increase the retail side, 20%, what would you anticipate the needs would be from that element with respect to number of personnel? Obviously, that will also impact the proposal made for the building, which requires the police building to be 1,581 square feet. So I would imagine as that expands, the need for more space there will also expand. But that's an assumption I'm making. That's just a suggestion.
Right. So obviously, if we got to a level where we were seeing an increase in our personnel, then yeah, that would necessitate more space. So it sounds like we're in a sort of a nebulous hypothetical at this point. If you're talking about a 30% increase in the population, obviously that's going to, you would assume that would drive up our call volume 30%. It might actually be more because there's a difference between single family housing and multi-family housing in terms of services that it requires from law enforcement in particular. So it's not exactly a formula where you would say we would take our volume of calls for service now and just assume a 30% increase. It may be greater than that. When you have density, population density, it's a lot different than single family residences that are spread out. And for example, you'll have when you have a shared parking lot, you're going to have a host of vehicles that are going to be parked overnight. Those are attractive. You're going to have, and sometimes the demographics of multifamily housing can be a little different. So it may require increased police services and calls for service. As to how that would affect the size of our agency, I'm confident that short of a major increase, we're able to handle more than we do now. And if, we'd have to evaluate that. If it were a substantial increase, then, I'd work with the city administrator and we'd see the feasibility of not only increasing the police department, but there may be, if the city were to grow exponentially, there's a lot of hats we wear in terms of code enforcement and animal control that at some point may need to, those roles may need to be increased or their own sort of entities created. So a lot of that's speculative in nature, but just to not get too long-winded on that, I think, if there were a slight increase in population right now, I think with our current staffing, we would be able to accommodate that. And then, we'd have to evaluate and kind of see what what plan presents itself. If there was proposals on the table, I think I would want to be involved pretty early on that, so we could have some aspect of planning for our agency and what might be anticipated. But of course, if we're seeing an increase in retail, an increase in the population, then hopefully there'd be a commensurate increase in the tax base to support perhaps additional officers if that's required. In terms of the retail space, I think if there were to be some increases in even doubling of what we have currently, I don't think that would impact our staffing. I think we could handle any increased call volume associated with that based on what we see presently. But of course, that could vary depending on what type of business there is. There was, so that's a factor. I know currently we have 5 banks, for example, and in a city our size, I think I wouldn't recommend any more banks, as that could present unique challenges in terms of responses for bank robberies or occurrences in the bank. But retail, that's similar to what we have now. I think in terms of the police aspect, we wouldn't have any issue with growth in that area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there questions from any of the other members of the committee?
Brooke, I have a couple, and there are 2 that Tom had told me that he wanted to ask when I spoke to him earlier today, so I'm going to list those. One is he wondered, particularly with a potential hotel use, what issues you saw with respect to needs and services changing. Second, the possibility of a trail along Dry Creek. What you saw with respect to needs and services there. And then I have a third question, which is slightly off topic, but still important to this discussion, which is, I was wondering if you could, so the first one was hotel, the second one was trails. The third question I have relates to the need for a better building for the police. And a lot of the community has asked me, why do we need that? And I've heard different people say different things. So I thought it would be a really good opportunity, since this is being recorded and some people go back and watch these, for you to be able to speak directly to the community about what needs the police department has infrastructure wise.
Great, and I appreciate that question, so thank you. So let me start off with the hotel aspect. So depending again on the type and the size of the hotel and the services it offers, I mean, very often there is alcohol being served. So we'd have to get with TABC and make sure that everything's compliant with the licensing and permitting on that end of it. And then much as I spoke to in sort of a multi-family unit structures, you're going to have parking lots, you're going to have overnight parking. You're possibly going to have, sometimes you have disturbances or whatnot. So, we'd definitely see an increase in our calls for service. Whether that would necessitate adding additional personnel to any given shift, it would kind of, we'd have to see how that manifests itself. Again, we'd want to be involved in the planning, not just so we can anticipate the staffing levels we might expect, but also to make sure that, crime prevention through environmental design practices are being followed, and that a lot of times problems can be prevented before they even get a chance to occur if buildings are designed. It's very common for folks to get input from the fire department or from fire experts when they're building a building. It's not as common to get input from law enforcement, and that's unfortunate because there's sometimes just minor things we can do that recommend in terms of designing facilities and structures that might sort of nip problems in the bud. So I'd like to be involved in that if that were ever to move forward. But again, I don't think that a hotel in and of itself would overwhelm us. I mean, I've worked in larger agencies where we had a multitude of hotels, and
Who's
obviously,
hurt? Oh, yeah. Why wouldn't he go? He needs basketball.
no, I don't believe there's anything outside of what we can handle. And again, if we evaluate that and determine there's a need for increased staffing, hopefully that would be offset by the hotel motel tax that would be generated. But I wouldn't, my first goal or my first step would never be to add officers until we really understand what's involved. And I think in many cases, our current staffing levels could suffice. In terms of the trails, I think that might be something that would be of enjoyment to members of the community. I mean, we patrol that area anyway. We've recently purchased a new Kawasaki mule to be able to access that area. We are checking that for sometimes transient populations, folks that are out there setting campfires. Sometimes there's drug use out there. So whenever there's a space that's sort of reclaimed by the public, often we see crime go down because, now you have people enjoying it. You have witnesses, you have eyes, you have ears, you never know when somebody's going to be coming by. So it very possibly could aid us in our efforts, but regardless of whether there's a formal trail there or not, I mean, that's an area of the city that we have to patrol nonetheless. So we're already out there. We already have bicycles. We have the UTV. We have the equipment to check that area out. In terms of our building space, I appreciate the question. I know there was a study done that was prior to my arrival, so I didn't really have input into, and I'm not sure where they came out with the square footage and the figures. But I will say that the space we have now has been remodeled. So it's, when I came over, we had that trailer and it was used to begin with. And so I'm very appreciative that the city has remodeled the facility that we have. It's clean, it's professional looking. So we're appreciative there, but it's the constraints we're having are with size. And we have a lot of equipment that we have to store. We have no place to put it. We have encroached upon Public Works. We've taken a large portion of their garage to create a secure evidence room, to have a cage where we can store our equipment and some of our vests and uniforms and things. There's quite a bit of gear that modern police department we have to sort of have. So that's an issue we have. We don't have our own bathroom. In fact, the entire city hall shares one ladies' room and one men's room, and we share that. Right now it's not as noticeable because of the COVID situation. The access to city halls are very limited, but in a normal scenario, that's the same restrooms that the public uses. Folks using the park, vendors or people coming in. So we don't have proper restroom facilities. We don't have changing rooms. We have a female officer. We may have additional female officers in the future. And in the current climate, we don't recommend our officers going home in uniform. We don't have a place. Sometimes they're out, in the blocking the bee caves when there's flooding, or they're out in the rain, or they're getting involved in situations where they're dirty. We don't have a locker room. We don't have showers. We don't have a changing room. So there's just facilities that we're missing. We don't have a break room. Again, these officers spend 12 hours here. They either have to eat in the car or they eat at the very desk where they're working. I don't know that that's appropriate. I wouldn't expect many of us want to eat at our workstations. We like to have a break area. And again, even in City Hall, there's not a break room. So it's just, one of my challenges is recruiting and retention. And so I want to make sure that we're, when folks, I actually had an officer come today from Shirts. He's looking, maybe applying, so give him a tour of the facilities, and he realized he may be spending several years here and looking, the cramped facilities. Is there enough workstations? Is there adequate room? Are you cramped in there? You know, that's their, basically the vehicle and the police station, that's their office, that's their workspace. And then of course, on top of that, we have all our vehicles. We have our police fleet, you have city hall employees, and you have my officers' personal vehicles. You know, parking's an issue. I don't know if that was addressed in the study or not, but currently we take up that parking lot and then a portion of the upper parking lot. So the evidence room right now is not inside the police station. So that gives, and it's, you know, it's the best setup we can come up with, but it's not ideal. The server to all our equipment is in my closet in my office, and that generates a lot of noise and a lot of heat. We have window AC units, and I've had meetings with council members, with members of the community, or phone calls, or city staff, and we either have to listen through that noise or shut it off for the duration of the meeting. So there's a lot of challenges with this current facility, and I think you know, City Hall in general, and I think City Administrator Lewis can speak to sort of the overall City Hall issues, but in terms of our facility for an agency even of our size, basically it was a converted 2-car garage, I think is what we're operating in. So, you know, there's ample opportunity to hopefully make some improvements. And if there's, again, I saw that proposal that many of you are referring to. I wasn't necessarily involved with that. I might disagree somewhat. I think the space we need is probably more than that. And then the other thing to keep in mind is future growth. You know, I don't know if there's ever the will to make some changes or to change the workspace or the office space. There, you know, I don't know when if that comes to fruition, I don't know when that would happen again. So I think you need to plan also for future growth. You know, what you may expect. I mean, that's one of the reasons you guys are having these meetings, discussing potentially scenarios that might increase the population of the city. So I think it would just be good to have some thought into all that. So if anyone has any sort of questions as to any of I know I've covered a lot of material there. If anyone's got any questions on that, I'd be happy to entertain them.
I have a follow-up on the police station question. Do you feel, and I know this might be taking both you and Amber off guard, so I apologize if you don't want to address it. Don't feel bad. Just say you hadn't thought about it. But
Sure.
One of the things that other people have mentioned, so I felt like it was worth bringing up. Do you feel, and Amber, I would love your opinion too. Do you both feel that the two need to be in the same building? Do we need to be thinking in the scale of having one big building, or is it possible to have a police department in a different building than the City Hall?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that because I have given that a lot of thought. Typically for smaller agencies, it's not unusual to have a police station within the same building as City Hall. I think we could really operate effectively either way. It really, you know, at the end of the day, it's where can we get sufficient square footage and practical design? If that can be incorporated into one building for greater cost savings, you know, that's great. If it turns out, you know, that those space requirements require sort of moving us to a separate location, then that would work as well. But yeah, it's not uncommon to have, you know, we don't operate a jail. We don't have anything that would sort of necessitate us being a standalone building. It does need to be for, you know, it needs to be a secure facility. We do have access through our server. We have access to FBI database through links we have the evidence. I mean, there are certain protocols and procedures we can have in place, but I think those things can all be incorporated into good design.
And I think from a city administrative point of view, I definitely feel that we're more efficient if we're in the same building, because the police department does pick up some of the administrative functions such as code enforcement and animal control. And so we rely on them to do a lot of the things that, other cities would have specialized staff to do. So I agree with Chief. We could work just fine in separate locations, but I do feel like there is an added benefit to being in the same building.
Brooke, I see that Jeff has his hand up.
Okay, good, because I can't see Jeff. Jeff, would you like to, you have a question? And which Jeff?
Sorry, Jeff Marks, I opened up the participants. I pressed the participants button and that opened up a side view of anyone who had their hand up.
I see. So Jeff Marks, would you like to ask your question? We're not hearing you, Jeff. Amber, can you tell if Jeff is, Jeff, you'll need to unmute.
Yeah, it looks like Jeff is still muted.
Okay. Well, then we'll come back to Jeff. I see Wallace, do you have a question?
Not a question as much as like the mayor to introduce our chairman who's now joined us along with the mayor.
I saw that, and I'm happy to return the gavel to its proper place.
Well, my apologies. We lost our electricity and it took me a while to reset our router so I could actually get online. I think our construction across the street managed to do something, but it went dark for a while, but we're up and operating now. Thank you. Without going back over the same ground, Chief, did you address the and I can watch the minutes on that so I can tell, but you addressed the issue of the trail and the possible site that was recommended in Pegasus report for a hotel on the Park Hills Baptist Church site from a standpoint of policing, whether the trail would provide whether we could police it properly, whether it would increase crime, and the same thing with the hotel site. Y'all may have already talked about this, and I apologize if you have.
Right. So we covered all of those topics.
Right.
Again, if it wasn't to anyone's satisfaction, I'm happy to elaborate on any further questions.
I'll go back and look at it, and if I have any, I'll just give you a ring if that's okay. I don't want to take up your time, Chief.
And that's true of anyone listening in. My phone's available. I'm available at all times.
Great. Thank you, Chief. And Amber, I assume that you let everybody know that Gavin could not make this meeting, but he'll be here next week.
I did.
Great. And so I'm just pick up where we are.
We were just seeing if there are any other questions of Chief Brady by the members of the strike force.
Yes.
I actually have a follow-up question, if I may, Chief. So I misspoke before when I said it was 1581 square feet that was required, that it was another part of the new building. Looking at this, it says 1783 square feet. Did I mishear you, or I misunderstood that you would like more space than that or less space than that?
I don't have that. I wasn't prepared to speak to this particular issue, although I'm happy to. So I didn't have that report in front of me, but I believe the report you're referring to, where there was basically a study done, and based on the perceived needs that they had for us, I felt that space was insufficient. While my brain's sort of warming up again too, another important thing that we're missing, in fact, all of City Hall is missing, is we have no meeting space, no training room, no conference room. The actual council chambers are people's offices. And if we want to do training, we almost have to make sure there's no conflict of schedules to use that space. If I want to bring someone in to do some training for my officers, or we want to have a conference meeting, I mean, just things that are typical in any police department or really any work environment is, we're lacking break rooms, briefing rooms, training rooms, storage. So that I wasn't consulted with that particular study, but I would, and I certainly don't want to exaggerate or overemphasize or have more space than we need, but there's a lot. Like, again, we need a server. We need a dedicated server room. We have servers that we can't share with the city server just for CJIS compliance reasons and security protocols that we have to meet in order to be able to continuing accessing certain databases we have. I don't think a lot of those things were factored in. If there was to be the momentum to look at maybe coming up with some new space for City Hall or for the police department, I would certainly, I'd have a vested interest in having input into that.
Chief, do you also want to speak to kind of the beatings that the vehicles take since they're not covered under covered spaces? You've got all, like you said, it's basically your mobile offices. You've got all that computer equipment in there, and they're not shielded from the weather.
No, we don't have we don't have a covered parking spaces, and our vehicles tend to not get the turnaround a lot of other agencies do. So if you ever have an opportunity to get up closer to any of our cars, particularly the older black and whites, I mean, have a look. The dashes are cracked. The sun has done a job on the paint and the decals, and just the wear and tear that the weather can inflict on them. It would be nice to have a design where that space is covered. I know our police vehicles and really all city vehicles, I mean, for the budget we have, those are expensive assets, and taking care of them, making them last, I think is promotes the best safety for the officers, and the best safety for the citizens, and ensuring that equipment is fully functional. And again, when they look bad, I mean, it's hard to take pride in your city and your agency. But more important, again, is functionality. So certainly, if something like that could be incorporated. Parking is always an issue, and this city has already put on additional personnel since I've been here. And I mean, that every time you do that, that's an extra parking slot. So, incorporating that into a design, I think, would be very wise.
And, we just got the new mule, and a couple of weeks ago or last week when it was raining, I noticed that it's just raining on the seats and we don't have anywhere to park it. So, the integrity of the seats, the seat belts, all the lights that you're going to have on the mule, those are all exposed. And as you mentioned, it's a big deal for us to get a piece of equipment. And as staff, we want to take the best care of it that we can, but we're limited.
We have a hand up. Wallace.
Yes. I'm probably the only one uninformed on this whole group I'm sitting here with. How much land is the current city own where the city hall is? And what other land does the city currently own as an alternative?
The city hall sits on an acre, and then Hatley Park surrounds the city hall acre, and it's just shy of 9. The city does not own any other land.
Well,
Thank you.
well, actually, Amber, we do own 5 acres off of Edge Grove. It's in the floodplain, but we do.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Buildable land.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What about that Delana lot that's been emailed about several times?
You're right, Ryan. We do own that land. It has restrictions. It was dedicated as green space when we did the PUD. It was donated by Endeavor to the city. And I think it's about 2 acres roughly of land. And then, of course, we do own several other tracks, but they're usually for our lift stations that we have for wastewater. They're not buildable sites for anything other than that. There are restrictions on what we can do with that 2 acres off Delana Lane. It doesn't mean we couldn't do it, but we would have to make an agreement with Endeavor, because that's part of our agreement in the PUD as to what we could do with it.
A quick question. If the 1 acre that the city hall is currently on were to be improved with a larger building, does the city have to, the city offices would have to move to temporary space while that happens? Does that temporary space have to be inside the city limits of Rollingwood, or could the city staff and police force, I mean, obviously you don't want to move your police outside of the city?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a good idea to pay for space for city offices, with taxpayer dollars outside of the city limits. Obviously, we wouldn't want to move the police department. It doesn't make sense to have public works outside the city limits. Also, the city council and possibly the boards and commissions also have to meet within the city limits. So there'd also be a concern about where we could hold public meetings. Right now it's fine because we're virtual, but that would also be.
So in order to really do anything different, even with the lot where the city offices are now, office space will have to be available inside the city limits, or at least meeting space inside the city limits, office space for the police department to temporarily relocate while that redevelopment happened, right?
Yeah.
I have a question about the space that we're in now. Is it subject to the restrictions that were placed on the park land that was donated surround it, or is it not?
Not. It's not, Ryan. That was purchased fee simple, and that was a different purchase than the park on that. There are prohibitions, and Amber, you can address this better than I can probably, but there are prohibitions against using park space for anything. I don't think we've ever taken any state or federal funds on our park. But if you use that money, there are restrictions that apply as to whether you can reuse it or sell it, or how you have to, what you can do with it that comes in. I don't believe we've ever taken any. I don't recall ever taking any federal funds for the park. We may have taken some state funds, but if we did, I don't recall which ones that would be. We've done everything in-house, so I don't think there's any restrictions. But the area on the other side of the playscape is an area that right now it's green belt and it's just an open area. And that's also owned by the city, and that is not also that's not under the restrictions for the ball fields.
What about the playscape?
The playscape down below is also not. We purchased, and that may be included. Amber, you're not including all that in the land that we had on that.
Yes, I am. Yeah, the 9 acres includes the lower and the upper park. It's kind of the surrounding of the city hall 1 acre tract.
Yeah, but the playscape down below was not included in that purchase from the Optimist Club. So it doesn't have the same restrictions as the upper playscape. The upper playscape does, Ryan.
I think it's limited to just the fields.
Yeah.
I need to recheck that.
I was just trying to, as part of this process, be creative and trying to figure out how, because obviously the best solution when you, having gone through one of these in a City of Austin project, the best solution is, if you can, is to only build once and essentially build next door to what you already have, and then convert what you already had into something else rather than having to move twice. And sometimes you'd have to renovate the place that you're going to lease before you even move into it. And so just trying to be creative in the space that we have. I would be interested to see if we really do have contractual restrictions on what we can do with Delano. I know that they don't, my understanding is they donated it to us as part of that process. But I don't know what enforceable contractual restrictions they would have against the city, but I would love to look at it.
Sure, we can send it around, and I can send around the warranty deed too, because Tom, yeah, I think you're right. I think it is that whole, it's been a while since I looked at it. So we'll send those two things around to everybody.
Right. It's been 20 years, Ryan, since I looked at that, to be very honest. And but I do remember it as part of the negotiation with the neighbors behind it, that was going to remain a green belt. And we actually at one time looked at whether we could utilize that for something else. And there was a restriction. Now, as I recall, at that, it's been a lot of years. And so I apologize. I'd have to look at it again. There, as I remember, there is a little bit of land behind our main lift station there that we actually own that's different from the greenbelt area that we're talking about, the 2 acres. It's not a lot, but there is a little bit down there too. Because our lift station, we wanted it big enough if we had to enlarge that, we could.
I'm not sure that we own the land. It's dedication by easement, right? Where our lift stations are.
I just don't remember, Amber. I couldn't tell you offhand. It's been too long. So, but we can check it out, Ryan. That's easy enough. Even reading it, I'm not sure what restrictions I'd be reading, but I bet you could tell. This takes somebody that's a little better trained in that stuff than I am to be able to tell on that. So, Chief, do you have anybody else have a question for the chief? I don't see any hands.
I have one question,
Brooke?
and I'm not sure it falls to you, Chief Brady, but what comments would you have about increased traffic along Bee Caves Road if there were increased retail facilities on the north side of the road? Do you have a comment about turning left into those facilities or getting back onto Bee Caves Road if you're exiting one of those commercial properties?
Right. So if we anticipated a significant increase in our retail footprint there, I would certainly encourage a traffic engineering study to make sure that that the flow is disrupted as little as possible. Obviously, you know, I don't know that you would necessarily have more traffic on Bee Caves, but you're right, you would have more folks turning in and out. And these are situations that occur everywhere in the country where there's expansion and there's a science to it. And I wouldn't want to just be by the seat of our pants with that. I'd encourage engaging proper traffic engineering to make sure that we can accommodate that increased traffic flow into those retail areas.
Chief,
Do you know, does the city require traffic impact analysis to be done for new developments?
We do.
yes, we do require that. But Chief, I have one other question. So one of the things that we've always tried to do in Rollingwood is make sure that we don't have a shorter travel time down Rollingwood Drive than we do Bee Caves Road on that. And obviously, Campo has always wanted Bee Caves to be one of the main thoroughfares that comes from western Travis County, Burnett, all the way out to Burnett County, probably beyond that now. And they've come up with different plans over the years, which Rollingwood has not been in favor of. I mean, one of them was contra traffic during rush hour on BK's Road, which would, of course, limit what we could do per se on anything. It hadn't happened yet, but they've talked about that over the years. And one of the things that, of course, that is a state highway. We've always had the location, and I don't remember I think it's BK Woods Drive, has always asked for a traffic light there, which is be additional and we haven't ever agreed to do it. But more lights, slower traffic on BK's Road, potentially more traffic on Rollingwood Drive. And so my question is, other than, and I realize this is more of a traffic engineer deal, but from an enforcement standpoint, do you have any suggestions how to discourage more traffic bleeding from BK's Road onto Rollingwood Drive and Timberline Drive, for that matter?
Yeah, I think I would revert back to, again, traffic engineering. And when you commission that kind of work to let them know that that's one of your concerns, one of the things you're trying to avoid. So I think with bee caves, but besides potentially increased traffic, we have a lot of issues that instead of maybe addressing them piecemeal, that maybe we address all these at the same time. One of the things City Administrator Lewis and myself and some other of the city staff are looking at are ways to mitigate the flooding we have. So it might be time to look at a more broad and sort of more strategic plan that would impact not just traffic flow through the city, increase traffic, increase retail, but in terms of really life and death safety, in terms of the flooding there, the improvements that are going to be required for our stretch of bee caves. So my thought would be, you know, to maybe, and I don't know if that's the purview of this particular task force or something other than that, but I think sort of a broad, holistic view of all of bee caves and all the implications for future growth and our current sort of flooding situations.
Now, BK's Road, of course, just so everybody knows, is a state highway, so we don't we have input to TxDOT when they listen, but that's totally
Right.
their bailiwick as to what they do there. They've been I know we've worked on getting that part of it and along Dry Creek resolved forever, and my guess is that TxDOT right now is telling us they don't have the money to do it, although they have the plans in place, a plan in place. I'm sure they'll modify it. Amber, do you have any update on that, or that you want to provide, or Amber? Oh, didn't have her. Well, I know the city council's worked on that for several different city councils have worked on that to try to get that resolved on that. So, but Edge Grove is a different matter, and that is within the city's purview to do that. Amber, is any update on TxDOT's plans for BK's Road right now?
Unfortunately, I haven't heard any updates. They had to redesign because the design was so old, and they got the schematic done, and then that's where they stopped. So
Okay.
we haven't heard from them, unfortunately.
All right. Any other questions for the chief? Don't see any raised hands. Chief, thank you. And thank you for everything you do for our city on that. Thank you. Tell your officers, we certainly thank them for what their service is. So.
Welcome. Thank you for saying that. And we'll, and like I told everyone, my door's open if you have questions at a later time.
Appreciate it. I'm going to move on to item number 8, which is our update on the Rollingwood Utility Commission and utility capacity in the city of Rollingwood. Bill, I think you're on the Utility Commission.
Yeah, that's correct.
could you give us an update on the, you sent a very detailed email, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad to see that that's happening, but would you mind giving a brief update on that?
Sure. So briefly, we had a couple of consultants in last week, and we voted as the commission to submit the proposals to take towards the city council with our recommendations for them to be took forward. The first one was in two parts. It was underdone by Melissa Hedden Consulting. And the first part of that study is going to be looking at the city's LUE assignment and policy. And from a cost perspective, it wasn't that much, I believe. I think it was less than $4,000. Amber and Ashley can correct me if I'm wrong. So we put that proposal forward for the city to consider. The second one, which I thought was probably more pertinent to what we're discussing, was regarding peak water usage and wastewater. I did explain within that that's one element that we would be looking in with regards to the capacity of the wastewater. Within the models of which they can do, it sounded like they could model a future growth of up to 5 years and possibly more if we anticipated that. And it would be fairly easy for them to change the inputs with regards to the population and the retail to come up with some formulaic number for the amount of wastewater that would be required. So I know that's kind of important from our standpoint of where we're looking at potential developments later on and could be restrictive to that. In order to do that, she did need access to all the contracts that were out there and all of the hurdles which may exist. But again, that was something that we, as a utility, put forward the proposal to the city council for their to look and whether they would approve on that. And I think the cost on that was just a little over $10,000. I think both of those projects will give us some more information as to what we're trying to accommodate. And also it may stop any duplication of work of us trying to run around and get some answers. If we have a consulting firm that the city council, if they choose to accept the proposals and undertake the work, I think that would be something that would be of use to us to be able to incorporate within our decision-making process on behalf of the community. The second one, which is also very important with respects to the undertaking of a lot of the drainage issues, was a presentation by WSB Engineering, who I believe were our prior engineers. They are going to look initially at mapping the easement locations around the city. Now, if they were to do this plot by plot, if memory serves me correct, that would be a very, very expensive exercise. However, they were able to provide this and do this and have done it for several other cities and provide a map which would be backed by some form of third-party software. And as long as that third-party software is available, the map would always be available. However, the data we would get would be our data if we were to choose to use them. So again, we undertook the information there and submitted our recommendation and proposal to take that to the City Council for their consideration. Both of these consultants, the Utility Commission, supported the taking them forward, and so it's up to now, I think, when the City Council meets and votes upon that or looks at it, whether things go forward. With respect to Melissa, the LUE, it sounded like she could have a fairly quick timeline. 60 days is what she mentioned from start of when she actually started to come up with some answers. I didn't get a time frame on the other elements of the work. It's online if people want to listen to the presentation in depth. The slides are up there as well to give a lot of the background with the individuals and companies concerned. But personally, I've been very happy with the work that's been done, very professional. very timely and, answers the questions quite directly and is open to input, and looking forward to working with her if we ever did.
Right. We did locate the original LUE study and had the estimate on wastewater was 1,017, if I remember correctly, Amber, that we had available totally within our system. So the city of Austin has a different way to calculate that than I would probably do it. They take the average wastewater use and calculate that to available LUEs. But since we have a limitation on a per minute pumping, I think we probably ought to look at it from a standpoint of peak usage to determine whether or not we have it. Amber, make sure that that the consultants know we do have that big holding tank down at Delana Lane for wastewater, because that could make a difference in their calculations too. Because we can pump 24/7, it's just a per minute limitation that we have.
And I think she was referring to a peak usage, if memory, and Amber could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the basis of her work.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to do it on peak. For some reason, the city of Austin recommends you do it on average, and I'm thinking that probably wouldn't work for us, given that we have a limit per minute on that. Thank you, Phil. I think that's great, and I appreciate that the city is undertaking that, because I think we need it, whether this commission was here or not. We need to know how much capacity we actually have in each of our systems on that.
Well, it's been put forward to the council, so it's up to them to decide.
Great. Hopefully they'll decide.
Mike's on the phone, so he should.
Yeah. Okay, any comments or public comments or discussion on item number 7? Very succinct, so I think you covered it all. Phil, thank you. Let's see, that would be item 9, and item number 10 is our discussion and possible action, public comments, and possible action go the establishment of goals, objectives, and guiding principles for each of our subdivisions. This was one of the, I received an email from that suggested that we should do this for each of our subcommittees, and as a starting point as we proceed through this. I thought it was a good suggestion, and I think that we should adopt that on each of our subcommittees as we finalize a report on that. And if there's any comments or not on that, just let me know if you have any pros or cons. But I thought that was a good suggestion, and I think that I certainly will take it up on what I'm doing. And I hope our rest of our subcommittees do the same thing on that. So that's just, it would just take an opening paragraph to state that, I believe would do that. And then we adhere to it as we go through the reports on that. Any comments? Seeing none, we will just adopt that as part of our deal.
Tom?
Yes, hi, David.
When do you envision kind of getting those paragraphs, and would those be, part of whatever the subcommittee report is, or were y'all looking for a?
I'm thinking it should be in the subdivision reports as they come.
Subcommittee reports, yeah. I think that makes sense, and I think that's something that on a subcommittee by subcommittee basis, I think would be fairly simple to put in there.
I would actually back up just a little bit. If we get those done where we start off with that, I think that would be good to bring back to our committee as soon as you have them, just to kind of review those and have everybody get to take a look at it. So, but that would be, I'm thinking that the final draft will start off with that, and then obviously we would go through and adhere to the report to these goals we had on that. So item number 12 is our public comment on that. Excuse me, on item number 11 is our update from the BK Road Subcommittee. And David, I'm going to ask you to give that if you would, if y'all have met or.
You bet. We have not met as of yet, but it is my intent. I know that there's been some discussions between a few of us informally, or I believe, and it's my intent to the extent people are around kind of in the next couple weeks to get rolling on that. So I'll be reaching out to Ryan and Meredith and Jeff and Chris to get that rolling. One of the things I have informally, I won't say asked, but I've informally warned Carrie Kaler, who's our very capable development services coordinator with the city, is that I will likely be coming back to her with a formal request to take an inventory of all the properties that are not covered by PUDs, i.e. all the commercial properties that are not covered by a contractual PUD agreement. And to the extent we have information and development services readily available, try to inventory really three things primarily related to existing conditions. One, what is the current impervious cover of a particular commercial site? Two, what is the current height of the existing site? And three, to the extent, and this may be a little bit more difficult to calculate given the widening over the years of the BK's Road right of way, what the current setback is from the BK's right of way. And, part of that we may, and there's some different tools that Carrie and I have talked about being able to shoot distances and lines and stuff. But I think one of the things that I think is going to kind of help us as a group move forward is knowing, okay, what do the existing conditions look like on properties that may be redeveloped over the next, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. So we kind of know, okay, what do we have now? And then kind of how would our vision differ or not differ from existing conditions?
Right. All right. Thank you, David. Item number 12 is discussion, public comment, and possible.
Mayor,
Okay. Yeah.
Tom,
Oh, Wally.
have I yet been included on the BK Road Committee? I
Uh,
wasn't mentioned.
there we go. Good point, Wally. Yes, David, I would like to include Wally on the BK Road subcommittee.
Right, Wally, we'd love to have you and your input.
Very good. Thank you. And I'd love to contribute and listen.
Right.
That's great. Thanks, Wally.
David, on item number 12, it's been one thing that I'd like to look at on this is, we have the comments from the city council when at the last city council meeting, I think it was the last one, that I addressed them and asked them about whether they wanted to the conditions that they put on the north side of BK's Road, i.e. 2 stories use on that. And I wanted to kind of think about this from three things I'd like to look at that. One, you've got 2 stories, but also consider the height of a building and also consider the visibility from our residential homes to those developments on BK's Road. Those are 3 things that I would like to include as y'all go through this. And the other suggestion I've received, which I think is a good one, is that you guys look at it, have 2 different sets of ways to look at this, 2 plans, if you would. One is a higher density use, and the second would be, or higher use, not density per se, but just a higher use, and the other would be a lower use of the properties. So those are what I think that we should include in our BK Road plan when it comes back on that. And I'm open to comments on that.
Yeah, and Tom, I appreciate you saying that, and I agree with you. Those are some of the things we should be looking at. Let me kind of tell you kind of what I've spent kind of some independent time, talking with Carrie about trying to get that data, et cetera, and kind of where in my mind, I think some of the questions we as a subcommittee and then eventually larger group need to be looking at is, particularly looking at the north side, any potential redevelopment of the north side. I think we need to be, cognizant of where we are right now, so we understand, where we may or may not go in a redevelop, or where a developer may or may not want to be able to go in a redevelopment scenario. For instance, some of those lots on the north side, just because of floodplain, et cetera, it's parking becomes a concern, which is one of the reasons why I want to look at that. And current impervious cover question, and, at current conditions, as well as I think from a, 2-story / height perspective, one of the things I've kind of started doing with some of the Rollingwood residents who are kind of willing to let me and others on the subcommittee stomp through their backyard, or, sit outside, is basically, trying to get a perspective of kind of, what some of the different existing buildings look like from some of the backyards and from some of the homes in the neighborhood. And, things like, okay, pitch roofs, flat roofs, exposed equipment, et cetera. And, I think, those are some of the things that I think is worth a little bit of time on the subcommittee getting into, because I think those are the sorts of things that at the end of the day are I think going to matter to, people in residential properties backing up to some of these places that either exist now and or are potential redevelopment sites.
David, you might want to take a look at, when I know Amber's going to send it to you, but the PUD agreement on Rollingwood Town Center, we addressed a lot of those issues in the PUD. Now that's, again, it's 20-some years ago. So this it probably needs to be updated, but that may be a good starting point to look at on that.
Yeah, and I'll definitely pay attention to that. I think you're right. I think that PUD is going to be indicative of, a lot of the negotiations that, would otherwise take place on a property by property redevelopment process with, developers or potential developers and their land planning consultants. And, I think one of the values of this process is, hopefully, through some of the discussion, through some of looking at this on a property basis, particularly on the north side, I think we can at least hopefully have a blueprint to give a potential future developer who may be coming in and looking at potential purchase for redevelopment of a commercial property on the north side, what, or really anywhere in the commercial corridor, what as a city is a something that can be negotiated, and frankly, something that's going to be a non-starter. So I think that will be well served by the eventual product having that as a guide. So we'll take a look at that. Thanks.
And David, you're okay with these guidelines that I kind of outlined for you about things y'all look at and the reports, how we do that? Does that work for y'all?
The 3 points you just outlined now?
And the high use and low use of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we need to look at that also, because, and that's the other reason I want to, frankly, take a look at, primarily existing impervious cover, and as well as the setback issue is, because one of the things that, I want to make sure that, we're kind of being cognizant of is, not running afoul of, it's setting us up for any sort of, Chapter 243 claims against the city or anything else. And, you know, where we have flexibility to, well, and we'll get into it as a group, but it's, you know, basically it's taking a look at kind of where we can give a little bit on, you know, maybe spreading out square footage as opposed to going up, you know, in order to keep heights down, where we can potentially move structures closer to Bee Caves Road, rather than have a 100-foot setback and move them away from residential structures, you know, possibilities of either landscaping or fencing requirements, et cetera, in order to basically make something that is going to be functional from a redevelopment standpoint, but also being protective of residences and community values on the back end.
Right. Is any other discussion that we have on that? Any comments anybody want to make or any discussion?
Tom, I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
I would just note, David, and I'm sure you didn't mean to leave out the PUDs, but I think to the extent that the owners of the PUDs would want expanded property developmental rights, and to the extent we agreed that they should have them, I think that should be on the table too. And I say that because I think that the PUDs are the places that we have in previous generations recognized as the places where development was least likely to negatively impact us, but was most likely to have a good return on investment for the city. And it seems like if we're going to consider upzoning or increasing the use elsewhere, that those should be kind of back on the table to the extent those owners would like to see more rights. And the example that I always give people is if you go into the Trader Joe's development and you turn left instead of right, there's a row of single-story doctor's offices and I think a gym. There's a 3-story development behind it, office building behind it. And I don't happen to know what the height limits are at the of those offices, but it seems like if they were cabin to 1 under current restrictions, yet there's a 3-story building behind them, it doesn't really make sense for either them or us. It didn't really help us that they're limited to 1 story, and it may have reduced the amount of income that they could make and revenue they could make. So, and I think the same thing with the hospital district. I think several city council members have mentioned to me that they're not sure that ended up being used as everyone expected it to be, and it's possible that the developer there would like to consider something else. So I don't think you meant to exclude PUDs, but I think it'd be good to keep them as part of the conversation in case those two are an opportunity.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, I think your thoughts and comments there are spot on, and you know that illustrates why this is a group effort, because those are great points, and I absolutely 100% agree with you that those are some of the things that we should be taking a look at and asking as well. So thanks for your thoughts on that very much.
Any other comments?
This is Brooke. Tom, just clarification, when you say higher use and lower use, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, what I'm thinking is, and this was a suggestion made to me, which I thought was a good one, is we look at it as being both on the primarily on the north side, I would think, but on the south side, we do have the limitation of the 2-story deal, and whether or not that is, what type of development we would recommend on each lot. And it may be a higher use, i.e. traffic, utilities, that type of thing, versus a lower use that may not have those type of issues on that. That's what I'm thinking. And I'll get some clarification on that further for them.
All right.
Thank you, Brooke. Any other comments? Not seeing any. We'll move on. Update from the single family subcommittee. Jordan Scott has a family emergency. I think everybody knows that we have Jordan's had to drop off, and the council's going to replace, I think, at their next meeting, give a replacement on that. I know they have not met as far as I am aware. Mo, are you on the call? No.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, y'all haven't met yet, have you? Okay. Well,
No, we have not.
So we will, we'll just kind of leave it at that until our next meeting, because I think then we'll have whoever they appoint on that, I'm going to ask them to be on the committee on that,
Okay,
too, if you don't mind.
that sounds great.
Great. So we'll skip item 14. Brooke, do you mind if I take some of the other issues? Because I think you guys have the most data to go over. If you mind if I go through some of the other agenda items and then come back to you?
That would be fine.
Right. The item number 17, then we'll skip to that. And that is an update from the utility subcommittee, which is me, which y'all have heard from Phil in regard to the utility commission. So they'll have a definitive answer on that. Just going through the numbers the way the city did on the wastewater, I think we came up with, we had available 300 to 350. I don't want that to be a number that we use until we get the utility commissions, the consultants that's going to tell us the actual numbers that they come up with. This was just an estimate that a quick, easy estimate, which may or may not be accurate. So I don't want to use that, but that's what, if you use the City of Austin's methodology, that's what you come up with the remaining capacity we have on wastewater, which I don't agree with their methods, but that's another matter on that. So we'll get back on that. And 18, I think we've covered. 19 is a discussion and public comment and possible action on Pegasus modeling issues and other questions regarding Pegasus presentation. So do we have any, I'm just going to do this. Do we have any discussion on what they've done so far on their modeling and on their presentation that anybody wants to make a comment on? Otherwise, we can move on. Any comments?
Tom, this is Brooke again. I had circulated an email to the committee maybe a week or so ago that outlined additional questions I have in regard to the Pegasus modeling that's been done so far. And I would like to get, at this point in time, I would like to get some additional feedback from Pegasus, both the inputs to the modeling. What we have in the presentations, for example, are end results like this is the anticipated retail revenue. We don't have a breakdown for restaurants within that category. We don't have estimates. I just have several questions that I've outlined in the Pegasus modeling that I'd like to get answers to.
Sure.
And I don't know what the process is for doing that.
Well, we can ask them. I think I made sure Pegasus has your questions. Sean, are you on the call?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I did receive those questions from Amber on Friday, and Brooke, those were all very good questions. And some of them, I think there are about 17 questions. Some of them are going to take a good amount of time to go through with you all. So what I'd like to do is, and I've already started it, is just to give a written response on every question. And I can get that to you all probably tomorrow afternoon.
Brooke, does that work for you?
I hope that it will, and I'm happy to proceed on that basis.
We will, we'll address it.
If it's easier to call and talk with me about it than to write an answer, I'm happy to do that as well.
The only difference is if we do that, then the rest of the committee doesn't have that.
Right.
So I'd rather it be either at a report or either at next meeting that we have had.
Okay.
And I will say too, one of the questions you were asking for all of our, different assumptions, there's probably at least 20 different assumptions that we have. And we make certain calculations that create
Yeah, I'm out of the
inputs,
meeting.
other assumptions. And
Good. Not going anywhere.
so when we go through all of those, it may be good to spend that. I'm happy to do that at the strike force meeting, or if the BCAPE subcommittee is in, that might be an applicable place as well. So whatever you guys would like on that, I'm happy to do that.
I think if you took, this is Tom, and my preference is that you go ahead and do what you're planning to do now, which is answer those, and then we can discuss that. If it's not, Brooke, if you have any follow-up questions, if you can ask those so we can go over those after they are being prepared at the next meeting on that.
Okay.
That works for everybody.
I have are we meeting next? Is there a meeting next Monday? If I am not going to be able to attend.
Okay. Well, we'll get, if we get those, Brooke, if you get satisfied with the answers in the written part, just let me know and I'll address that. Otherwise, we'll address it at the meeting after that.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. That'll work.
Hey, Tom,
Yes, sir.
as a follow-on to Brooke's comments and kind of what you just indicated, plus Sean's offer, Sean, I can tell you that, you know, it's my intent, subject to the folks on the subcommittee, to lean on you pretty hard on kind of our analysis on a property by property basis. You know, because I think we're gonna have a lot of questions for amongst ourselves as a group, and then, you know, asking you kind of in terms of, you know, a reality check of, you know, particularly, you know, as I've drilled down on some of the properties on the north side that are smaller, higher existing impervious cover, floodplain issues, et cetera, kind of a reality check on what's, you know, really doable there under a redevelopment scenario and not, and what's really marketable there or not. So I think we're going to basically lean on you pretty heavily in terms of, you know, kind of data and getting into some of the underlying assumptions, so we can kind of, well, not kind of, so we can get to on those properties in particular, kind of what's realistic and what's not. Because I just don't think some of those properties are going to, from a parking standpoint, and primarily support a very dense redevelopment scenario that would either basically incorporate too much additional height. And, you know, if that's the case, I think we should take a look at that and get it on the table pretty early.
Yeah, I'm happy to support you guys, work with you guys on that.
Thanks.
I have one question for Sean, actually.
Yes, sir.
The assumptions that you did make and waiting on answers for, I'm assuming they are in a pre-COVID world, especially from a retail standpoint. Have you thought about, or is there any consideration be given to life in a post-COVID world where retail is probably a little bit different than the world we were used to, and probably different than the assumptions that were used in the initial analysis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I had the answer to that, I would be making millions of dollars right now. And I can tell you that I follow national retail experts pretty closely. And I was on a call last week with the executive director for Downtown Austin Alliance, who was giving a feedback on what's going on with their commercial space. And Class B office space is clearly on the out. I can tell you that from a retail perspective, they see there's definitely a transition that they see probably all the way through next fall, but that they anticipate by the end of 2021 that retail will actually be back to the level that it was at pre-COVID.
Does that answer your question, Phil?
Partially. I think if we're going to start looking and going on future development, we should have the ability to have some flexibility with the outputs that are generated as well, because we always tend to be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic. And I think there's there's some form of distribution curve associated with this. it's not a defined answer.
Yeah. You know, the other part of that answer, and I'm sorry, I kind of fell short in answering you completely. So our model does not incorporate any COVID or post-COVID differences in retail. And that is simply based on what I'm hearing from experts. We can model that. It's just a matter of us, you know, kind of collectively coming up with different assumptions of what that might look like.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, I'm hoping that I have a personal hope that this is gone by the time we do all this, so we don't have to deal with COVID after the first of the year.
I agree, but behaviours have changed.
Yes, it does, and it has for all of us.
Yeah,
I would say especially with respect to office space. I mean, it's anecdotal, but you know, my office downtown is empty. I'm on West 6th Street. I think it's 20 something stories, and every time I go in, it's completely empty. And Facebook has most of it. It's my understanding they are looking to transition to allow a lot of these kids, and it's mostly kids that are employed there, to stay home, because it may not be worth paying for the premium on downtown. And then one of my firm's biggest clients is the biggest oil and gas company in Austin, just got acquired, and they're moving to DFW area. So, and that's 2 buildings in downtown Austin. They're about to live there. One, the owner, and the other, their tenant. And so, you know, there's a lot of disruption in the office market that I think could definitely have an impact on our numbers.
they're nice buildings as well.
Yeah.
Just on the office space, though, I just want to reiterate everything that I'm hearing locally and nationally is that class B office space is definitely going to be redeveloped. You will not see much class B space at all. You know, Wallace, your development, that's what we would classify class B office space.
Yeah.
And
I'm running at about a 5% vacancy factor, and I haven't had much problem.
Excellent. That's good. But what we see is that a lot of that class B is going to be redeveloped into, at least in downtown Austin, mixed use retail and still office. There are still new office deals surprisingly being inked as we speak in downtown.
Right.
And that's kind of to add on to one of the things, Ryan, I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, I think one of the things we will drill down on is basically in the kind of BK's corridor, you know, subcommittee is basically, and I think Phil, your words are right. I mean, you know, it's at least short-term, you know, behaviors have changed. And, you know, one of the things about kind of the economy of late, you know, a year ago, it was, you know, office was hot and, you know, hot on fire. And, you know, all these, you know, Facebook employees wanted to be in these big group offices with kind of no boundaries and everything else. And now, you know, there's been a seismic shift. Now, you know, will it go back to the way it was? Probably not. But, you know, it's also what we're talking about doing is, you know, we're talking about creating a comprehensive plan that's going to have a life of, you know, decades if we do it right, not necessarily, you know, to dictate things for the next year. And I would also contend, and I think, you know, I think others that have been around for a while would back me up that, you know, a lot of these commercial properties that we're going to be looking at may not turn over for, or may not be sold or redeveloped for decades, because it may be more generational turnover than anything else. And also, Phil, to get to your point, I think we need to make sure that we understand and built into, you know, whatever our output is on this comprehensive plan, you know, a principle of adaptive management. That there are some fundamental principles that we don't want to see change over time, and some things that are static that we're not going to see want to change over time. So those are probably more design details, but that we may understand that there may be some, you know, slight usage details that are adaptable that we may want to build into it. And that's, I think, something for discussion that I think both you and Ryan, you know, really brought some good points to.
Excellent. Any other questions on that? Are there
Hi,
any?
Tom.
Yes.
Hi,
sir.
Tom. This is Jeff Marks. Yeah, I have a question for Sean. So Sean, thank you for sharing the slides a few weeks ago. I tried tying out the numbers from the slides and I had some difficulty. So I was trying to understand if there's a way, see if there's a way to understand some of the assumptions that were made. So I was curious, would you be able to share the model that was used to create the outputs in those slides?
Let me think about that. That's not something that we typically do. I'm happy to go through those though, verbally with you and others. And happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And I had a separate question. Did you make an assumption around the growth of the residential tax base?
We did have just a rate of inflation that we
Okay,
applied.
thank you. Did you consider the amount of turnover of homes in terms of redevelopment, like homes getting knocked down, new homes being developed over the last few years, like the current number of permits in the residential part of town?
We were asked not to address or touch the single family residential, which we have not done.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all that I have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your work on this. Okay, any other questions from Pegasus, for Pegasus?
I have a question.
Yes, Ryan.
On the most recent scenarios that went out, I noticed that the assumption was made that 1.5 persons would be in any residential unit on average, which I'm not great at math, but I think that means that at the very least, half of new residential units can only have one person in them. And I was just wondering where the data came from that suggested that condos in Rollingwood would only have one person in them, so many of them.
Sorry about that, I was unmuted. That's a great question. There's a difference in household size between single family, condo, and apartments. And the single family is much higher value than condos and apartments. So we've used a lower value for that, which is what we typically see in condos and apartments.
Is there a comparable data set that you can point us to for coming up with that assumption? Did you look at, say,
Yes.
mixed use in Zilker area, for example?
Yes, we can do that.
And Sean, as you go through and iterate your different versions of your reports, is there a way, because assumptions matter, right? And there's a lot of work that you have behind these PowerPoints. Is there a way to get like an outline of the key assumptions and then have like a low, mid, and high range for this? Because again, we're kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard here and not knowing exactly where it's going to land 10 years from now, but just to understand the variability by these different assumptions that are driving your models to get to more range of outputs versus, it will generate down to this dollar of incremental revenue.
We can definitely do that. Frankly, I need to talk with city staff and possibly council about that. There are expenses involved with that, and we can definitely do that. Our overall budget, I don't know if you know, is $60,000 for everything, including the land development code writing. And we're a couple months into actually not being paid at all for some of our work. So we need to have some discussions with city staff about that.
So Sean, if it's helped to you, I've done some modeling on this. So I run a modeling group for a global credit rating agency, and I've done some modeling of my own on this. So I can help with actually modeling out some of these assumptions that you or the strike force would like to run. I'm happy to do that if this gets into a cost overrun situation.
Jeff, are you part of the BCAVE subcommittee?
I'm not officially on strike force. I'm moving in a few months.
Oh,
So I'm a community representative, but I'd be happy to join those meetings if you're, Tom, if I'm allowed to join those, I'd be happy to.
Certainly are. I would tell you, you've been great working, and Sean, I think you'll find that Jeff is very good at that. So that
Great.
should be a big help to you.
Nice to have that as a resource.
I have a question, Tom.
Yes.
And this is back to Sean. Are your responses to the questions I have going to go to the whole committee or just to the subcommittee?
I was going to send those responses to Amber and let her decide that distribution list.
I think it should go to the whole committee.
We'll
not-
send them out, yes, to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions of Sean? We'll move on to 21, discussion, public comment, and possible action to conduct a new survey of Rollingwood residents and to form a subcommittee. And this is something we've heard from a lot of residents that want a new subsequent survey, and I think we should do it. And I would like Ryan to head that up. And if Ryan, I would ask if we have any volunteers to help Ryan with that endeavor.
I'll help.
Okay, we've got Brooke.
Thank you,
Anybody
Brooke.
else would like to volunteer?
I'm his next door neighbor, so I'll help.
He knows where I live.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Let me just say that we've got several sources that can help with the formation of this survey. We've got the original Pegasus survey, which I would like to utilize as much of that information as we can. We've got several people that have volunteered that have expertise in surveys. And Ryan, if you don't have those, I'll be glad to send you what I have. And then I've reached out to the University of Texas today, which I haven't heard back yet, to see about the LBJ school, whether they would be able to assist us at doing that also, to help doing that. And I guess, Ryan, let me just ask you, is that something that you would like or not like, or you tell me?
I would like all of the input.
Right.
I'm always in favor of more rather than less input. So, and I also think, to the extent people can check our biases, that helps too, because my goal for any survey would be to not lead the audience to any particular conclusion, but to invite them to tell us what they want, and then for us to attempt to synthesize that information as best we could. And I think that it would help probably the process to have someone like that available. But I would invite anybody to submit questions. If you don't want to be on the subcommittee, to please send questions to Tom and I and Brooke and David. I know that Councilmember Patillo at the last council meeting that I watched, I apologize, I'm not sure, there's probably been one in between, they meet a lot, but the last one that I watched, she said that she would like some questions on Tom, you may remember the subject better than I did, but there were some particular questions that she would like to have asked. And so I spoke to her today. She is dealing with some family health issues. So I told her, don't press on it, but when you get around to it, when more important things are taken care of, to send us the questions that she has to, and I think that part of this is we need to ask all the council members that. Let's have a good survey that is as inclusive as possible, that attempts to answer as many questions as we have on both the residential and the commercial side. I would not envision this being a bee caves only survey, but a survey that attempted to answer all the questions. So Mo, I would call on you too, also with respect to the neighborhood side. Are there questions that need to be asked about the way we're going to develop the residential side too? That'd be my goal, just to be as inclusive as possible, to get good, clean information that's from non-leading questions, and I would appreciate any support that we got.
Right. Well, thank y'all for doing this. I think this is important to, I can't tell you how many notes and emails and comments on that I think it's important that we do that. Thank y'all for taking the time to do it.
Tom, what do you have an idea for timing? Because that kind of impacts how quickly we move.
I think the survey should go out in January. I just don't see that we can, that it's prudent to send it out during during the Christmas season, holiday season. My experience just tells me that that's going to be on the bottom of everybody's to-do list. And if we do it at the first of the year, I think we can get that done better. So that gives you all several weeks to get that ready.
I think now that I think of it, I think Meredith and Wally, to the extent you guys have kind of a viewpoint from the business side too, I think that would be really helpful. Of what would we not know to ask that you would know to ask from your perspective?
Right. Thank you, Ryan. Any other comments? Any public comments that we have on item number 21? Seeing none, I'll move on. Item 22, the town hall meeting. Discussion, public comment, and possible action regarding the town hall meeting. I thought it went as well as, I was disappointed, frankly, that we didn't have 1,400 people on the call, but you know, that's the way life is. And I think we had 58 participants, which I'm glad we had 58. I just wish we had 1,400, but you know, that's the way we go on that. If there's any comments on how we run the next one differently, please let me know. You know, I've got thick skin, so criticism doesn't bother me. So if there's any way that we can improve it, please feel free to reach out and just let me know on that. Any other comments on the town hall meeting? Not seeing any, we'll move on.
Tom, this is Jeff Marks. When is the next town hall? I didn't see it on the schedule.
We haven't set it yet, and I intend to set it at the closer to the end of January would be my preferred time.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Tom, on that too, do you envision that we have a draft before the next town hall meeting for people to speak to, or do you envision us not yet having an input or output for them to look at?
I think the next town hall meeting, my intention was to have another sourcing town hall meeting where we just get general comments from citizens. And then once we get after that, I think we can address how we approach presenting some of our data to the citizens on that. That's just kind of my thought as to how to do that. I wanted to give everybody a chance up front through 2 meetings to be able to voice their opinion without going into too much specifics on that. If they want to go into specifics, they can, of course, but that just was my thought on how we approach that. So, all right. Brooke, I'm going back to item number 15, and I'm going to take, you've got a lot of data.
I do. I think Phil and I can both run through it fairly quickly. And I will begin, and Phil, jump in as you see fit at any point, please.
Sure.
What I tried to do and what we tried to do was to get a handle on what kind of, if the city comes up with a number for improvements, a cost number, the drainage issue, the city hall, various things are on an agenda with various numbers with them. And we're working, obviously, this committee in getting a handle on what those numbers might be. But on the other side, we're also needing to look at revenues. And so this information was to look at revenues from the side of the city issuing additional bonds, and what kind of bond capacity would the city have at various levels of increase to current tax bills. And so we've asked the city's bond advisors to help with this, and they've done just a great job, and they've been very receptive to the project. So what you see in this packet is their output from 9 different scenarios. we can walk through the packet, but let me just describe it. Then I'll summarize the what's in the packet and answer questions. And if anybody wants to walk through the packet, I can show you where all the numbers come from. But I think maybe getting to the bottom line is quicker and more helpful to the committee to do that first, and then let y'all, to the extent you want to get down into the nitty gritty of the numbers, we can do that with questions. So the bond advisors ran numbers on 9 scenarios. The first 3 scenarios are a scenario where the rolling wood tax rate would be increased by 2%, 4%, and 6%. And so as the summary shows you, the first 3 lines in the table on the center of the page, this summary.
That's page 10 on the agenda.
Yes. Shows in the first column, new bond capacity. So if we're reading across the page, the city could obtain $815,000 with a 2% increase to the existing rolling wood tax rate. That existing rolling wood tax rate is 12.4% of any given taxpayer's total property tax bill. In other words, rolling wood gets 12.4% and all of the other taxing jurisdictions get the remainder of that. So the second column shows the impact to the rolling wood tax bill. The third column shows the impact to the taxpayer's total tax bill in percentages. And the fourth column shows what the annual debt service would be for that level of bond capacity. You could look at this the other way. For example, with the first line, the far right column, annual debt service, $51,000 in new revenues to the city will produce $815,000 in a bond, assuming a 20-year term for that bond. So if you go down the column, bond capacity, at a 4% increase to the rolling wood tax bill, that would produce $1.6 million in a 20-year bond. At a 6% increase to the rolling wood tax bill, that would produce almost 2.5 million in bonding capacity. And then the fourth line, a 17% in the rolling wood tax bill would produce $10 million to the city of Rolling Wood. That 17% increase in the rolling wood tax rate is really, if you look at the third column, a 2.11% increase in the total tax bill, because the relationships across the line, the 12%, the 17% is of 12% of the total bill. So that means at 2.11% increase to the total tax rate, you would obtain a $10 million of funding in a 20-year bond. The very right-hand column has an asterisk for that, which notes that that 17% increase assumes that we have a structured debt service payment schedule as opposed to a level debt service payment schedule. And you can see in the package that the bond advisors prepared, you can see the difference in the annual debt service under either scenario. The levelized debt service takes that 17% a little bit higher initially in the first several years of the bond, and then it's lower after that. The 17% structured debt service assumes that the city would prefer to maintain as best it could a uniform tax rate and shifts the debt service payment over the life of the bond to match existing debt service in a way that maintains the constancy of the tax rate. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what we've shown here, then for the $15 million in bonding, the total tax rate would go up 3.23%. And those are percentages. So for example, with the $10 million bond level, if you have a $1 million property, your tax rate, your increase in your tax rate, let me see how to say this. Let me start over. If you have a $1 million property, the city passes a $10 million bond issue with structured debt service, you'll see your Rollingwood property tax bill increase by 17%. And in the next column, the .2774, that would mean if your property is $1 million property, your tax bill is going to go up by, your Rollingwood tax would be $2,774 then, as compared to $2,369 today. In other words, for the $10 million bond, the taxpayer would be paying $358 more a year, or $30 a month. So I think, go ahead, Phil.
So I was going to say, maybe it should be stated that within the town hall, there were questions regarding the debt that currently exists and the debt service. All of this presents in the embedded documentation post page 10, all of that. And I believe all of these assumptions embed reservicing the existing debt and packaging it up into a new debt to optimize our own, what debt we own, such that, we've just got a one-stop shop. We've not got multiple credit cards we need to bill. We've got one thing, and here's what we need to do. And so that this first sheet is the most powerful sheet, I believe, out there, because as we've heard from our community, there's been questions raised about, what's the alternative to not development? Or, we don't want that, we just want it on our tax. This spells out if the community has $30 million of incremental needs, and that's still subject to questions, then your likely difference in absolute tax rate goes up to 2.0445 once you aggregate everything together, versus where it currently is today, which is just shy of 1.925, 1.922. So Brooke's done an exceptional job working with the person, just getting this to a summary page where I think we can demonstrate, here is your alternative if the city council decides we need to spend this amount of money and do not do anything else.
Well, in preparing for today, I think I'm short on this, on the one-page summary, in not having the example column with the change in the dollars in the tax bill for $1 million property, but that's easily added. So if I were to come to some conclusion, what I would say is that we can present the city council with a revenue alternative for meeting some of the needs of the city, and give that to them with impact showing what the with the number showing what the impact to residential properties and commercial properties would be, and we can present that to the community as well.
And let me just note to remember, the tax increases we're talking about would require a vote of the community on that.
Right.
And as would the expenditures, because they would be bond offerings and they would have to require a vote of our citizens. So it wouldn't be, city council can call the vote, but they get to vote as individuals, not as they don't vote for the whole city on that.
Correct. And one caveat there too, I haven't been able to determine, I'm not familiar enough with the new legislation that came out of this last legislative session to know if there's some absolute limit on what the city can do in terms of increasing its bonded indebtedness. But I'll have that and report that back as well.
Right.
I'll report it back.
Well, Brooke and Phil, y'all have done a magnificent job. I think this is great. I mean, there's some questions I had is, we didn't take into account any appreciation in our city's tax base, except for the inflation rate. Is that fair?
That's not correct.
Oh,
In
okay.
the scenarios 5 through 9, that you have the U.S. Capital Advisors assumed a 2% increase in the base property valuation over 5 years, but not thereafter, which
Okay.
is pretty conservative.
Very.
That's what I was getting to. I assume the 2% was the inflation rate they anticipate as they go through that. Is that fair, or just that's the appreciation rate?
That's a property evaluation for 5 years.
Okay.
But what I think it does is it kind of outlays a worst case scenario if it could go through the whole rigmarole is, you know, if the community and citizens decide as a community that we really don't want to do any development, but we really need all of these fixes, this is the impact on what it's going to cost. So on $1 million home, you're kind of talking it's $1,200–1,300 a year incremental taxes based upon these assumptions.
Yeah, and Phil, let me ask one thing that it kind of also is the value of the work y'all are doing is, you know, I mean, we can put out as a group a comprehensive plan that has all the recommendations for, you know, future redevelopment in the world, but the market may not support it. So, I mean, the reality is, you know, I think it's valuable that y'all are looking at these numbers anyways, because regardless of what we do from a comprehensive plan standpoint, you know, redevelopment and different use of the property that may either help from a ad valorem valuation standpoint or from a sales tax standpoint, you know, may not likely, and in a lot of cases won't happen for years and years and years into the future. So thank you all for what y'all are doing.
Yeah.
Ryan, this would be useful information in the survey, I would think, to show alternatives to any kind of one source that we'd be looking at on that.
Yeah, I wonder if we can get it on the comprehensive, on the Strikeforce website so that people can begin to see that. I think that'd be really helpful. So I wanted to just follow up to make sure that I understand, and I think I do, but the modeling that Jeff Marks has done where he kind of takes a conservative prediction on how many houses will flip in Rollingwood over the next however many years, 5–10 years. This is assuming that essentially that does not happen, right? That the properties stay the same way they are in the residential side.
2% growth for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Year over year growth.
I'm sorry?
The assumption is 2% year over year growth for the next 5, which is conservative, yes.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I mean, I think it's highly likely that each of our homes, without doing anything to them, are going to increase in value more than 2%. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wanted to get it out there so that people understand. I believe that this essentially assumes that no houses are going to go from current $1.5 million value to redeveloped, you know, 3.5 or whatever that number is on average.
As per in the town hall meeting with the property person, you know, you're not going to. This doesn't incorporate an assumption that $1.6 million teardowns are now $6 million homes.
Right. And that's why I just want to make sure that's out there so people understand, as I think you, Phil, you made very clear, this is a worst case scenario that in fact is probably unlikely or highly unlikely, given that we know how fast houses are turning over in the neighborhood.
I do just want to remind the committee that the appraisal, the chief appraiser refused to revalue homes, residential homes this year. And so that was one of the reasons the city council chose to raise taxes. So this year was an actual example of a worst case scenario. I mean, I don't think it's likely it would happen 5 years, year over year, but just that it has happened and has been a reality.
Just to add flavor to that, I represent the biggest property tax protest company in Austin, and I've sued TCAD. My understanding from the information that I've gotten is that they are going to reappraise in 2021. In case people weren't familiar with the backstory on that, the reason that they didn't appraise in 2020 is that it turned out that they had essentially a back end, a backdoor to MLS, which is they were paying, TCAD was paying MLS's computer service company a fee to access MLS's information, allegedly without MLS's consent. And that's how they were gaining access to MLS data. And that back door was closed. Now, TCAD does have access to some sales data when you protest on a recent sale. If you protest the value of a recently purchased home, you're essentially going to have to give the purchase price because that's the most accurate reflection of the current market value. So they do have some sales when people protest on a recently purchased home. Now, that's always going to be undervalued because the only time you'd ever protest your current bill in a year that you purchased your home is when they overvalue above your purchase price. But it's my understanding that TCAD is going to reappraise for 2021. And then also, Amber, I would like clarification on this. I believe, but my memory could be wrong, that one of the council members told me that they did reappraise for new builds in 2020, just not for existing homes. Do you know the answer to that question?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Let me find out.
Yeah, I believe the answer is that they did, in which case we would be gathering that information. What we wouldn't have gotten is the 2% increase. The other thing worth noting, and I think I talked to Tom about this earlier, is when TCAD increases the value of your home, it's not a dollar for dollar increase in your taxes. What they're actually doing is splitting your fair share of the entire county and municipal bills. So what they do is they take the entire budget and then they allocate it by your share of your appraised value. So it's a little more complicated than if everybody's home increases by 3% across the board, Rolling Wind doesn't necessarily get 3% more income. It just because the budget is allocated, your share is allocated of the budget. And probably didn't explain that well, but it's not just easy money every time. Like the county doesn't get more money just because your house value went up. The county is simply distributing the share of your home's value across the county's budget.
But Ryan, on that argument, Rolling Wood has a higher percentage of new construction single-family residences than the rest of the county. So I would expect Rolling Wood's share of the budget to go up, which would in turn drive up our appraised values for our city taxes as well.
I agree with that. And I also think that because our homes are worth more, a 2% increase for us is going to be more than a 2% increase for another zip code. Well, meaning that our share is going to be disproportionately higher on an across the board increase in home values.
Just one other follow up here. If we come to a new assumed rate of increase in valuation, I believe we can just ask U.S. Capital Advisors to run a new survey at that different assumption, and they will be glad to do it. So that possibility is out there also.
Yeah, so Brooke, on that, thank you so much for the analysis you put together. And I understand where USDA came from in making a conservative assumption. That's what I would do initially. But I think we really should look into the hard data that we have in the city in terms of permits and new construction. That's homes that are being turned over right now and homes that will come online in the next 5 years. Amber, I agree with you 100%. Appraisal values are going to lag and it's not going to track the market. Totally agree with that. But over time, I expect it to somewhat converge, right? So if 20% of our rolling with turns over in a 10-year period, I would expect those appraisal values to eventually catch up somewhat with reality. So I think that we need to take this into consideration against the backdrop of the number of homes that are currently under construction. I heard some numbers like 90 city permits. I don't have the hard data in front of me, but I did some really back of the envelope modeling. And I think with some reasonable assumptions, I saw our residential tax base growing by over 50% in the next 5 years. I need some hard data to substantiate that there needs to be more work that needs to be done here. I need help from the city. I need some data sets from TCAT, et cetera. But I think that this is fundamental. This is crucial that we do this analysis because this could really supplement all the work that Brook put together. And we can provide different scenarios, right? We can do conservative, base case, and kind of best case for residential tax increases, and then reflect that in the tax rate. We can look at the tax rate that would actually be needed to increase to fund these bond raises, because it's possible that simply through appraisal value increases, you could cover a pretty substantial bond. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jeff, for your work on this.
And then Brook and Phil, good job on this. Two comments is one, I kind of look at this in terms of the risk of your forward projections in 3 buckets. The most conservative one is going to be the gap between current real estate value and appraised value. Right, so that's really not betting on future home price appreciation. The second is going to be this conversion of creating new homes from old homes. And then the third, which is the most risky, is betting on asset prices going up in the future. So I think kind of dissecting that, right? Looking at bucket one will eventually happen. It's just a matter of time. Bucket 3, no one knows. But definitely getting some more credit for bucket 1. And then a simple question I had, I was just poking around here on Bloomberg. Rollingwood has, at least according to Bloomberg, 19 muni bonds outstanding. Is this U.S. Capital Advisors able to put together an inventory of all these municipal bonds outstanding? Some of them appear that they are callable. Are they in there?
And I'll share, if you turn to the 3rd page, not counting the cover page, it's marked page 2. Do you see schedule of outstanding debt service?
This is page 13 on the agenda.
Yep.
That has the 2012 bonds, the 2014 bonds, the 2019 bonds, and the 2020 tax notes.
Okay.
And that's actual service and remaining principal and interest. It's not the original issuance, it's the remainder. What's outstanding at this time.
Right. So I think these, like the 2014s that were issued, I think they're callable here in the next couple of years. And just where interest rates are now versus where they were in 2014. Mm-hmm. Right. So who manages that? I mean, just the ability to go refinance these and create additional borrowing capacity. Is someone with their eyes on that ball?
U.S. Capital Advisors does that. And that's what they do when they do what they call the structured debt service. Okay. If you look at scenario, if you look at page 6 and that, let's see, 5 and 6,
6 and 7, Brooke.
6 and 7. You'll see that the page 6 has the 10 million bond issuance with level debt service. And on the far right hand, you'll see the grand total debt service column.
Uh-huh.
And then on the next page, it's the 10 million bond issuance with structured principal. And you see the debt service column for all issuances there.
So what is it? They assume that they refied all these bonds then? Is that what they?
The level debt service assumes that they've refinanced all the bonds and come up with a level of debt service that maintains volatility, controls for volatility. Whereas the total debt service, you'll see that there are chunks of debt service. It drops by chunks of debt service.
And Drew, I just want to add that I work with US Capital as well to make sure we have our eyes on the call dates. And you might note that we just recently refinanced what was a 2012 bond issue in 2019. And the city council actually took action to do that. And they saved a significant amount of money. I can't remember off the top of my head what that was. I know it was over I think it was 2.6 million, but yeah, so we are paying attention to that.
But I hear you, Drew. We just need to put everything together now that rates are cheap and
yeah,
under one bucket.
Right. Well, and that happens regularly. That's pretty common for municipalities. Oh, and I need to correct myself. The level debt service is the one where the payment of debt service looks chunky, so to speak, and the structured principle is where it's maximized to eliminate volatility.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Maybe I'll give you a call and I'll just, maybe I can get myself up to speed. Sounds like you've spent a lot of time with this too, but.
I'd be happy, Drew.
Okay. Or Brooke, thanks.
Can I ask another question?
Thank y'all so much. Excellent. Ryan?
Yeah, I have one more question on that. One, at some of the early council meetings on these issues, I think it was Councilmember Gavin Massingill, so I apologize if I have that wrong too, talked about the possibility of doing these in short-term batches, maybe a short-term tax note to address the biggest problem, pay it off, short-term tax note to address the next biggest problem, pay it off. Have you guys considered that at all, or is that part of the analysis that we need to present to the citizens as a possibility for all of this?
I have not considered that.
We were just looking at it from a kind of worst case scenario. If we do nothing, here's your option. There can only be upside as a taxpayer from that point in time. So if you're really adamant that you don't want to develop the community, here's where it's going to be if we can rely on those numbers. And that kind of leads me on to another issue, which would be how much can we rely on, not that it's our job, but as a community, how much can we rely on that $28.3 million being accurate, and should there be more work done upon that if we are going to rely on debt? And the answer is yes, but it's not our call.
Does that answer your question, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another thing to throw out. I don't. You guys know way more. Every person who has asked a question or talked on the subject knows infinitely more than I do about that, and I'm never going to pretend to come up to speed. I just know that it was mentioned, which is why I brought it up. But I do agree with you, Phil, completely that which numbers are worst case scenarios in the numbers that have been floated, which numbers are not. I mean, which numbers are things that we have to address, which numbers are things that we may not. All that goes into the analysis too.
Brian, I'll add my view on that. I think from a modeling perspective, you generally want to keep things simple. So it would make sense to do the analysis the way they did it and not chunk it up. But from a fiscal responsibility perspective, it probably makes sense to do it incrementally. You know, that way the city can decide like what are the must-haves today, and then we still have money left over to do you know more development in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is.
The other advantage being you don't have to ask the citizens to vote. My understanding, and Amber may correct me, but my understanding is that you don't have to have a vote of the entire city to have a tax note, but that you would for a bond.
Correct.
I think on these major projects, it would not be a good thing, in my opinion. It would not be a good thing for the city to take on tax notes to do that. I think those are the ones that you need an election on to be able to determine whether or not the citizens will incur that indebtedness. So, but a short term, I understand, and that makes sense. But long term, I think that's probably that's my personal opinion to do that. So, as a citizen, taxpayer. So, okay. Any other questions, Brooke and Phil? Listen, thank y'all so much. That was a great. I know y'all have worked very hard on this, and I think U.S. Capitol did a great job, and I'm glad that they were able to accommodate y'all to get the information you wanted on that. So, if there's no other questions, then I would say that I'll invite the public to make any comments they would like right now. So if we have any other, anybody out there on any items we have on this agenda or just the work we're doing, this is a good opportunity to do it. Do we have anybody? Amber, any raised hands? Or
We don't see any raised hands at the moment.
Hey, Amber, Tom, this is Brendan. I don't know how to raise my hand. If I could just voice a comment. How's it going? I appreciate I'll be quick. And this is speaking, I understand that there is a component of the comprehensive plan that calls for, or at least there's some folks that may want to add trail systems or improve existing trails throughout the Rollingwood community. And so my comment is very narrow in sort of drilling down to a specific trail that's actually already existing on Old Delano Lane, which is a roadway that used to connect from Bee Cave Road to Rollingwood Drive. No longer used for automobiles, but the bones of it are still there. And in my opinion, a low-hanging fruit to make it an improved trail that could connect to the greater trail system over to the Nature Center and Botanical Gardens and Zilker and so forth. And so just voicing just want to put in public comment that, you know, any part of the comprehensive plan that speaks to trails and specifically Delano Lane, I think would go a long way, and the residents of Rollingwood and the office tenants and the office buildings over there would appreciate and benefit greatly from the use of.
Brandon, thank you very much for your comment on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have anybody else that would like to address? Any comments from our committee? Amber, Ashley? Okay.
Hey, Tom, I have a housekeeping thing.
Yes, sir.
It's and just kind of by way of reminder. So by my count, we now have 6 members of the Bee Caves Road subcommittee, which is awesome. But doing, and I went to law school mainly, so I wouldn't have to do math, but doing some quick math, we have a 13-member strike force. So by my math, as long as we stick at 6 for any meeting, we are not running afoul of a quorum, which is right where I think we want to be. But just we want to be as inclusive as possible as we work on these issues, but we also want to be mindful of not violating the Open Meetings Act or
We
anything else
can,
like that.
of course, David, we can get around that by just posting, so we can.
That's true too.
If we need to, and I would like to encourage, really, it's the subcommittee's purview, but I would prefer that it be open to anybody on our task force that wants to participate, they can do that. So if you don't mind, if we're close to that, let's just post and.
Which is great, but like any other subcommittee, we may have some ad hoc working sessions, et cetera. Anything that I think is substantive that people want to give input into, or anything that's substantive that I think as a group we feel like should be best addressed in an open meeting format. Absolutely. I agree that it should be open.
But I think I would encourage everybody to kind of participate everywhere they can on each one of these subcommittees, because the subcommittees are not, by themselves, because it just helps keep everybody up to speed on that.
And Tom, my point in saying that is just to make sure that we didn't have an inadvertent violation. But also, kind of as we go through this, I want to make sure that, as and everything else, we are being transparent, and also informative to both the fellow members of the strike force, but also the city as a whole.
Great. Thank you, David. Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn? David?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Here we go. Do we
Second.
We have a second, and I don't see any hands objecting, so we are adjourned. Thank y'all, and my apologies again.